Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We're going to spend the next 2.5 hours examining something that began as pulp magazine fiction in the 1920s and has since become the dominant metaphor for how contemporary culture processes existential anxiety. Cosmic horror, the literature of human insignificance. Emerged from a specific historical moment when scientific discovery was systematically dismantling every comforting assumption about humanity's place in the universe. What H.P. Lovecraft and his contemporaries created was not simply a new genre of scary stories, but a philosophical framework that treated the acquisition of knowledge itself as a form of contamination. This documentary traces cosmic horror from its philosophical antecedents through its literary codification to its current ubiquity in film, games, and internet culture. We'll examine the specific techniques Lovecraft used to generate dread through suggestion rather than description, the way his invented mythology became a collaborative framework that outlived him, and why cosmic horror has proven so adaptable to contemporary anxieties about climate collapse, artificial intelligence, and information overload. The question we're investigating is not whether cosmic horror is frightening, but why a century-old aesthetic built around tentacles and forbidden books continues to feel more relevant with each passing decade. By the end, you'll understand cosmic horror not as entertainment, but as a persistent philosophical position that some part of you may already believe. The world into which cosmic horror emerged was experiencing a profound epistemological crisis. Between 1859 and 1920, European and American intellectual culture absorbed a series of discoveries that systematically dismantled anthropocentric certainty. Darwin's evolutionary theory eliminated humanity's special creation. Geological deep time revealed human history as a statistical blip in Earth's 4 billion-year existence. Astronomical observation expanded the universe's scale beyond cognitive comprehension while simultaneously suggesting humanity occupied no privileged position within it. What made these discoveries particularly destabilizing was not merely their content but their irreversibility. This knowledge could not be unlearned, these perspectives could not be unseen. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1890, absorbed these philosophical tremors with peculiar intensity. His personal library contained works of astronomy, chemistry, and materialist philosophy alongside Gothic literature. By his early 20s, Lovecraft had abandoned the residual Christianity of his upbringing in favor of what he termed mechanistic materialism, the position that the universe operates as a purposeless machine indifferent to human values, consciousness, or survival. This was not Gothic pessimism or romantic despair, but a scientific conclusion that Lovecraft treated as the foundation for a new aesthetic. His extensive correspondence network, which included fellow pulp writers Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, and later Robert Bloch, served as both support system and collaborative laboratory for developing fiction that took cosmic indifference as its premise rather than its revelation. The economic vehicle for this experimentation was Weird Tales magazine, founded in 1923. This pulp publication paid poorly. Lovecraft earned between 1 and 2 cents per word, but offered editorial tolerance for experimental horror that conventional magazines rejected. The interwar pulp ecosystem functioned as speculative fiction's research and development wing, where writers could test ideas too strange for mainstream publication. Lovecraft's stories appeared alongside sword and sorcery adventures, detective mysteries, and conventional ghost stories, but his work operated according to different principles. Where traditional horror offered the comfort of comprehensible threats, vampires, ghosts, werewolves, Lovecraft's fiction proposed that reality itself might be fundamentally hostile to human comprehension. What distinguishes cosmic horror from prior traditions? Gothic horror derived its power from transgression against moral or natural order. The vampire violated death's boundary, the mad scientist defied divine prohibition. Cosmic horror eliminates the moral framework entirely. There is no transgression because there is no cosmic law, no divine order to violate. The entities in Lovecraft's fiction are not evil, they are indifferent. They do not punish human hubris. They simply exist in configurations that make human survival statistically unlikely and human values cosmically irrelevant. This represents a categorical shift in horror's metaphysical assumptions. Lovecraft articulated this philosophy explicitly in his 1927 essay, Supernatural Horror in Literature, where he defined the weird tale as producing a certain atmosphere of breathless and unexplainable dread of outer, unknown forces. The critical terms are unexplainable and outer. The source of dread must resist human categories of understanding and must originate from beyond human frames of reference. Traditional supernatural fiction, Lovecraft argued, remained too anthropocentric, projecting human emotions and ethics onto the supernatural realm. His alternative proposition, what if the universe contained intelligences so alien that human consciousness could not survive contact with them? What if knowledge itself, pushed far enough, corroded the structures that make human life psychologically possible? The interwar period's economic collapse and social instability found symbolic expression in Lovecraft's fiction, though not through direct allegory. The Depression's revelation that entire economic systems could simply fail, that civilizational structures were more fragile than anyone had imagined, resonates with cosmic horror's insistence on civilizational impermanence. Lovecraft's stories repeatedly depict institutions, universities, governments, scientific expeditions, confronting information that exceeds their capacity to process or suppress. This institutional failure, this discovery that the systems meant to protect us from chaos are themselves desperately improvised, speaks to anxieties that transcend any single historical moment. Understanding cosmic horror's origins requires recognizing it not as Lovecraft's personal neurosis made literary, but as a systematic attempt to translate early 20th century scientific cosmology into narrative form. The question becomes, what happens when materialist philosophy stops being an intellectual position and becomes the premise of fiction? Lovecraft did not invent cosmic dread from nothing. His innovation was synthesizing existing literary and philosophical currents into a coherent aesthetic system. The genealogy of cosmic horror extends backward through multiple traditions, each contributing specific techniques or conceptual frameworks that Lovecraft would combine and intensify. Edgar Allan Poe stands as the most direct literary ancestor. His 1848 prose poem, Eureka, attempted nothing less than explaining the universe's physical and metaphysical structure through poetic cosmology. Poe proposed that the universe originated from divine unity, expanded into material diversity, and would eventually collapse back into primordial oneness, a cycle of cosmic inhalation and exhalation indifferent to human duration. This was Poe channeling contemporary astronomy and physics into metaphysical speculation, precisely the methodology Lovecraft would later employ. More significantly, Poe demonstrated that cosmic scale itself could generate psychological terror. His tales of premature burial and sensory isolation explore consciousness trapped in incomprehensible circumstances, unable to escape or understand its predicament. Lovecraft absorbed this lesson: the mind itself could be horror's true location. Arthur Machen's The Great God Pan, published in 1894, contributed the template for revelation as horror. Machen's novel structured itself around fragments, documents, testimonies, investigations, that gradually assemble into unbearable comprehension. The titular entity represents nature's true face beneath civilization's comfortable illusions, not benevolent, not even hostile, but utterly other. Machen's innovation was treating nature itself, rather than supernatural intrusion, as the source of horror. His Welsh landscapes conceal survivals from pre-human epochs, suggesting that reality's surface is thin and what lies beneath never truly disappeared. The story's famous climax, seeing the great god Pan, equates total knowledge with madness and death. This formula, partial knowledge sustainable, complete knowledge fatal, would become cosmic horror's epistemological foundation. Algernon Blackwood brought cosmic indifference into explicit focus with The Willows, in 1907. Two men camping on the Danube encounter forces that seem aware of them only as obstacles, irritants to be eliminated with the casualness of swatting insects. Blackwood's entities possess no malice because malice requires attention, and these forces cannot be bothered with human-scale concerns. The story's horror derives from recognition that the universe contains agencies operating at scales where human existence barely registers. Blackwood's protagonists survive not through courage or cleverness but through sheer statistical luck, they happen to be in the wrong place at slightly less than the worst possible time. Lovecraft considered The Willows one of the finest weird tales ever written, precisely because it achieved cosmic scope through suggestion and atmosphere rather than explanation. Lord Dunsany provided the aesthetic of invented mythology. His fantasy works, The Gods of Pegana, 1905, Time and the Gods, 1906, created entire cosmologies with their own deities, histories, and metaphysics. What Lovecraft absorbed from Dunsany was not content but method. That fictional mythology, if rendered with sufficient internal consistency and evocative nomenclature, could achieve psychological weight approaching actual religious systems. Dunsany's prose style, ornate and antiquarian, demonstrated how archaic diction could make invented material feel ancient. His dreamlands, accessible through sleep, operating on alien logics, suggested that consensus reality might be merely one option among many. Lovecraft would literalize this concept in his own dream cycle stories, where Randolph Carter navigates realms that obey different physical and narrative laws than waking Earth. Robert W. Chambers, The King in Yellow, published in 1895, introduced the concept of textual contamination. His short story collection features a fictional play that drives readers insane, not through supernatural curse but through its content's inherent properties. The idea that information itself could be hazardous, that certain knowledge configurations might damage human consciousness, anticipates information theory by half a century. Chambers never reveals the play's actual content, readers encounter only fragments, second-hand accounts, and the consequences for those who read the complete text. This narrative structure, building horror around an absent center, a text that cannot be shown because showing it would nullify the effect, directly influenced Lovecraft's use of forbidden books. The Necronomicon, Cults de Gauls, and Unaussprechlichen Kulten all function as textual black holes, referenced but never fully quoted, their danger residing in information we cannot access. Philosophical pessimism provided cosmic horror's theoretical foundation. Arthur Schopenhauer's conception of reality as blind will, purposeless striving without direction or meaning, reframes existence as fundamentally irrational. Schopenhauer argued that consciousness was an evolutionary accident that allowed humans to perceive their own cosmic irrelevance, making awareness itself a curse. Friedrich Nietzsche's warning that, when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you, captures cosmic horror's recursive epistemological danger. Investigating reality's true nature transforms the investigator. These weren't horror writers but philosophers, yet their conclusions about existence's fundamental nature aligned perfectly with the effect Lovecraft sought to generate. The scientific romance tradition, particularly H. G. Wells, demonstrated how scientific extrapolation could produce existential dread. The Time Machine, 1895, envisions humanity's evolutionary descendants as degraded, specialized creatures, the beautiful but helpless Eloi and the subterranean Morlocks. Before revealing the Earth's terminal future as a dying sphere orbiting a cooling sun, Wells showed that Darwinian evolution had no inherent direction toward complexity or improvement. Species could simplify, regress, and ultimately disappear without cosmic significance. This was not fantasy but scientifically plausible speculation about humanity's long-term trajectory. Lovecraft recognized that properly applied, scientific thinking produced conclusions more disturbing than any ghost story. These antecedents share common properties. They locate horror in knowledge rather than ignorance, in cosmic scale rather than personal threat, in human insignificance rather than human persecution. Lovecraft's achievement was recognizing these scattered elements as components of a single aesthetic system, then developing narrative techniques to deliver that system with maximum psychological impact. Lovecraft understood that cosmic horror required a specialized vocabulary. One that would signal alienness while remaining pronounceable enough to lodge in readers' memories. The names he invented operate as phonetic markers of the inhuman, deploying sound combinations that feel deliberately wrong in English-speaking mouths. Consider Cthulhu, which Lovecraft glossed as approximately Cthulhu, with the understanding that human vocal apparatus could only approximate the actual sound. The doubled consonants, the guttural opening, the ambiguous vowel. All signal that this entity predates human language entirely. These are not names in the conventional sense but transliterations of sounds made by throats shaped differently than ours. This onomastic strategy extends across Lovecraft's pantheon. Nyarlathotep combines harsh consonants with shifting vowel patterns, creating a name that resists comfortable pronunciation. Azathoth uses the rare English initial AZ- and ends with the fricative th, producing a word that sounds simultaneously ancient and alien. Shub-Niggurath employs phonetic clusters uncommon in English, making the name feel imported from a linguistic system with different rules. What matters is not the name's literal meaning but their function as auditory signifiers of the non-human. When a story's protagonist encounters these names in forbidden texts, the reader experiences the same phonetic estrangement: these words don't belong in our mouths. The invented textual authorities serve a different function. The Necronomicon, supposedly written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazard, in the 8th century, appears across multiple Lovecraft stories as the definitive source of forbidden knowledge. Lovecraft never wrote the complete text, doing so would have destroyed its power. Instead, he deployed it as a narrative black box. Characters reference specific passages, describe its horrifying contents in vague terms, or go mad from reading sections the reader never sees. The title itself combines Greek roots, nekros, dead, nomos, law or custom, and icon, image or likeness, suggesting something like, an image of the law of the dead, or, concerning the dead. The name sounds plausible enough to generate decades of hoaxes, with pranksters inserting fake catalog entries in university libraries and publishers releasing actual editions of the non-existent book. Other forbidden texts extend this technique. The Pnakotic Manuscripts uses the unusual initial cluster, PN- to signal antiquity beyond human languages. Unaussprechlichen Kulten, nameless cults, in German, by Friedrich von Jundt appears in stories by both Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, demonstrating the collaborative cross-referencing that authenticated the shared mythology. Cultes de Gaules borrows French to add scholarly exoticism. These books function less as actual sources than as narrative devices. They explain how characters access forbidden knowledge while maintaining the reader's distance from that knowledge. We read about the books rather than reading the books themselves. Architectural vocabulary becomes the language of impossible geometry. Lovecraft stories repeatedly describe non-Euclidean architecture, cyclopean masonry, and structures built at wrong angles. These terms appropriate mathematical and architectural terminology to describe spaces that violate physical law. Non-Euclidean geometry, the mathematics describing curved space, was genuinely cutting-edge science in Lovecraft's era, having emerged in the 19th century as an alternative to classical Euclidean assumptions. Lovecraft seized on the term not for mathematical precision but for its evocative power, geometries that don't obey the rules human minds evolved to process. When a story describes Relia's architecture as non-Euclidean, it signals that simply navigating this space would require cognitive frameworks humans don't possess. Cyclopean originally referred to ancient Greek masonry attributed to the mythical Cyclopes, massive stone blocks fitted without mortar. Lovecraft extends the term to describe construction at scales suggesting non-human builders. The word carries implications of both antiquity and inhuman craftsmanship. Wrong angles and impossible perspectives deploy everyday geometric language to describe spaces that couldn't exist in three-dimensional reality, suggesting either additional spatial dimensions or fundamental violations of physics. These architectural descriptions serve a specific narrative purpose. They prevent readers from visualizing the spaces clearly, forcing us to confront our imaginative failure. Color terminology marks epistemological breakdown. Lovecraft stories frequently reference colors that characters cannot name or describe. The color out of space centers on a meteorite that emits a hue possessing no name in any human language. It exists outside the visible spectrum yet remains somehow perceptible. Characters struggle to communicate what they've seen, cycling through inadequate comparisons before admitting descriptive failure. This linguistic impossibility extends to other sensory categories. sounds that aren't quite sounds, textures that resist categorization, entities that combine features and configurations that shouldn't cohere. The vocabulary of sensory inadequacy, indescribable, unnameable, beyond description, becomes a signal that consciousness has encountered something it lacks categories to process. Mathematical and astronomical terminology gets appropriated for dread purposes. Lovecraft's stories reference star coordinates, cyclic intervals, and astronomical alignments, without explaining these concepts in detail. The terms borrow scientific authority while remaining vague enough to resist falsification. When a story mentions that the stars are right for Cthulhu's return, it invokes astronomical determinism, the idea that cosmic configurations dictate earthly events, without committing to specific mechanics. This pseudoscientific vocabulary creates an impression of systematic knowledge while actually providing none. The effect is similar to reading scientific papers outside one's expertise. The terminology sounds authoritative precisely because it remains opaque. The language of biological degeneration saturates Lovecraft's transformation narratives. Characters discover their genealogies include tainted bloodlines, undergo reversion to type, or exhibit atavistic features. These terms borrow from early 20th century evolutionary biology and eugenics, fields Lovecraft followed closely, including their most reprehensible applications. The biological vocabulary frames transformation as uncovering hidden truth rather than external curse. The monstrous was always latent, merely awaiting activation. This linguistic framework treats human form as superficial, temporary, subject to revision when deeper genetic instructions assert themselves. Lovecraft's specialized vocabulary accomplishes several simultaneous objectives. It establishes alienness through phonetic strangeness, authenticates fictional mythology through pseudo-scholarly apparatus, prevents clear visualization through geometrically impossible descriptions, and marks epistemological limits through the language of descriptive failure. This isn't purple prose for its own sake but a systematic attempt to develop a language adequate to cosmic horror's philosophical premises. If the universe contains entities and spaces genuinely beyond human comprehension, then the language describing them must somehow signal its own inadequacy. Lovecraft's etymological innovations remain so durable because they solve this seemingly impossible problem. How do you name the unnameable while keeping it unnameable? The term Cthulhu Mythos entered common usage through August Derleth in the 1940s, years after Lovecraft's death in 1937. Lovecraft himself never used this designation, never conceived of his invented mythology as a unified system requiring a proper name. What we now recognize as a coherent pantheon emerged accidentally through collaborative cross-referencing rather than systematic planning. This accidental quality paradoxically strengthened the mythology's verisimilitude. Real mythological systems accumulate through cultural accretion rather than single-author invention, developing contradictions and regional variations that signal organic growth. The Cthulhu mythos achieved similar authenticity through its collaborative, inconsistent development. Lovecraft actively encouraged other writers to use his invented elements. In his extensive correspondence, he wrote an estimated 100,000 letters during his lifetime. He explicitly granted permission for fellow pulp writers to reference the Necronomicon, invoke Cthulhu, or set stories in Arkham, Massachusetts. This generosity served both practical and aesthetic purposes. Practically, cross-referencing created an ecosystem of mutual citation that helped all participants' stories feel more grounded. Aesthetically, Lovecraft recognized that mythology gains psychological weight through multiple attestations. If only one author mentions the Necronomicon, it remains obviously fictional. When 5 authors across different stories reference the same forbidden text, it begins accumulating the patina of reality. The Lovecraft Circle, the network of correspondents and collaborators who shared and developed cosmic horror's vocabulary, functioned as a distributed creative system. Robert E. Howard contributed Unaussprechlichen Kulten and its author Friedrich von Junt, which Lovecraft then referenced in his own work. Clark Ashton Smith developed the entity Tsathoggua and the prehistoric continents Hyperborea and Mu, which other writers incorporated. Robert Bloch, who began corresponding with Lovecraft as a teenager, created the forbidden text, De Vermis Mysteriis, Mysteries of the Worm. Henry Kuttner added the oceanic deity Gtanathoa. Each edition expanded the collaborative mythology while maintaining tonal consistency. These writers understood they were building something larger than individual stories. The authentication technique relied on mutual citation, creating false corroboration. When Lovecraft mentions the Necronomicon in The Call of Cthulhu, and Howard references it in The Black Stone, readers encounter what appears to be independent verification. The technique mimics actual scholarship citation networks, where multiple sources referencing the same document or event strengthens credibility. Lovecraft understood this instinctively, having read extensively in both antiquarian literature and contemporary anthropology. He replicated scholarship's surface features, footnotes, Latin phrases, citations to obscure journals, while inventing the underlying content. The form authenticated the fiction. Geographic anchoring provided another authenticity layer. Lovecraft set stories in meticulously researched real locations, then inserted fictional elements with precise specificity. Arkham, Massachusetts exists nowhere except Lovecraft's fiction, yet it's described with such topographic detail, situated in the Miskatonic River Valley, northwest of Salem, accessible by specific rail lines, that it feels like a real place omitted from maps through oversight or conspiracy. Miskatonic University functions as the region's academic center, employing scholars who study precisely the wrong subjects and maintain library collections that should have been destroyed. Dunwich occupies Massachusetts Hill Country with detailed geographic relationships to actual towns. Innsmouth sits on the coast with a specific harbor configuration and architectural history. This geographic precision creates cognitive dissonance. The descriptions are too detailed to be entirely fabricated, yet the places cannot be found. Historical anchoring embedded cosmic events in documentable chronology. Lovecraft's stories reference the 1925 Norwegian expedition that disturbs Cthulhu, the 1908 Tunguska event as cosmic intrusion, the 1927 federal raid on Innsmouth. By tying fictional events to actual dates and mixing them with real historical occurrences, the stories achieve a documentary quality. At the Mountains of Madness reads like an Antarctic expedition report, complete with geological surveys and paleontological discoveries, that happens to uncover evidence of pre-human civilizations. The technique forces readers to sort real history from fictional insertion, a cognitive task that blurs the categorical boundary between fact and invention. Lovecraft deliberately resisted systematic codification of his mythology. Unlike later fantasy writers who would develop comprehensive backstories and consistent cosmologies, Lovecraft maintained productive ambiguity. The relationships between his entities remain unclear. Are the Great Old Ones and Outer Gods distinct categories or overlapping designations? What exactly is Azathoth's role in cosmic hierarchy? How do the various forbidden texts relate to each other? Lovecraft never clarified because clarification would diminish mystery. Real mythologies contain contradictions, regional variations, and irresolvable ambiguities. By refusing to systematize, Lovecraft allowed his mythology to feel ancient and incomplete rather than recently invented and artificially coherent. This intentional inconsistency created problems for later systematizers. August Derleth, who became Lovecraft's literary executor and attempted to complete his unpublished fragments, imposed a good versus evil cosmology entirely foreign to Lovecraft's vision. Derleth categorized entities as elder gods, benevolent, versus great old ones, malevolent, organized beings by elemental associations, fire, water, earth, air, and introduced moral struggle absent from Lovecraft's immoral universe. These systematizations achieved commercial success. Derleth's Arkham House Publishing preserved Lovecraft's work when it might otherwise have disappeared, but fundamentally misunderstood cosmic horror's philosophical foundation. Lovecraft's universe didn't contain good and evil, only forces with different relationships to human survival. The transition from personal aesthetic to shared framework occurred through gradual accretion. Initial cross-references were playful homages, Howard mentioning the Necronomicon as friendly acknowledgement of Lovecraft's invention. As more writers participated, the shared elements accumulated enough density to function as genuine mythology. By the 1940s, the Cthulhu mythos existed as a collaborative fiction that no single author controlled, available for anyone to extend or modify. This democratization meant Lovecraft's vision would be both preserved and transformed, kept alive through adaptation rather than frozen as monument. The mythology's durability stems from its modular structure. Unlike Tolkien's Middle-earth, which requires mastering extensive backstory, the Cthulhu mythos allows writers to borrow individual elements without engaging the entire system. You can write a story featuring the Necronomicon without addressing Cthulhu, invoke non-Euclidean geometry without explaining the outer gods, or set a tale in Arkham without referencing any cosmic entities. This modularity made the mythology accessible to endless variation while maintaining recognizable core elements. The barrier to entry remained low even as the accumulated mythology grew encyclopedic. What Lovecraft created, perhaps without fully recognizing it, was an open-source mythology, a collaborative framework that invited participation while resisting definitive codification. The Cthulhu mythos functions less like authored fiction and more like folklore, accumulating contradictory versions and regional variations while maintaining tonal coherence. This transformation from single-author invention to shared cultural property represents cosmic horror's most significant achievement. Lovecraft's personal philosophical vision became a mythological language that outlived its creator, adaptable to anxieties he never anticipated but somehow accommodated in advance. Cosmicism represents Lovecraft's central philosophical proposition: humanity occupies no privileged position in a universe operating as purposeless mechanism. This isn't pessimism in the conventional sense. Pessimism assumes the universe could be otherwise but happens to be hostile. Cosmicism eliminates the assumption entirely. The universe isn't hostile to humanity, it's indifferent, which proves far more unsettling. Hostility implies relationship, attention, the possibility of negotiation or resistance. Indifference means human existence barely registers at cosmic scales, our survival or extinction equally insignificant to universal operations. Lovecraft articulated this explicitly in a 1918 letter: "All my tales are based on the fundamental premise that common human laws and interests and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large." Ontological shock functions as cosmic horror's characteristic narrative event, the moment when a character discovers that reality operates according to principles fundamentally incompatible with human assumptions. This differs from mere surprise or revelation. Ontological shock restructures the basic categories through which consciousness organizes experience. Learning that Cthulhu exists represents factual update. Comprehending that human consciousness evolved to process a reality that doesn't actually exist represents ontological collapse. The horror isn't the monster but the implication: if this is real, what else about consensus reality is adaptive fiction rather than accurate perception? Characters in Lovecraft's fiction don't simply encounter new information, they discover their previous worldview was comprehensively wrong. Epistemic horror locates danger in knowledge itself rather than in ignorance. Traditional horror often punishes characters for insufficient knowledge: the teens who ignore warnings, the skeptic who dismisses evidence. Cosmic horror inverts this formula. Characters who investigate, who accumulate knowledge, who pursue understanding move systematically toward destruction. The academic who translates ancient texts, the scientist who examines alien specimens, the antiquarian who pieces together forbidden history, all doom themselves through curiosity. This epistemological inversion has profound implications. It suggests that human cognition functions best under constrained information conditions, that consciousness requires strategic ignorance to maintain stability. The Necronomicon's danger isn't supernatural curse but informational payload: it contains truths human minds cannot integrate without fragmenting. Temporal dread emerges from confronting deep time, the geological and cosmic timescales that reduce human history to statistical noise. Lovecraft absorbed this from contemporary geology and astronomy, which revealed Earth's 4 billion-year age and the universe's incomprehensible duration. In At the Mountains of Madness, the Antarctic expedition discovers evidence of civilizations rising and falling across epochs when humanity's ancestors were still aquatic vertebrates. The Elder Things built cities, created servitor races, fought cosmic wars, and declined into extinction, all before Homo sapiens existed. This revelation doesn't simply add ancient history, it eliminates humanity's narrative significance. We aren't the protagonists of Earth's story but a recent arrival likely to disappear as unremarkably as we appeared. Mechanistic materialism provides cosmic horror's metaphysical foundation. Lovecraft accepted the universe as material processes without purpose, consciousness as emergent property of matter rather than special substance, and physical law as descriptive rather than prescriptive. This wasn't religious heterodoxy but scientific orthodoxy taken seriously. If consciousness is material process, then sufficiently alien material configurations might produce consciousness fundamentally incompatible with human cognition. If physical law describes rather than prescribes, then locations where those laws operate differently, other dimensions, curved space, quantum superpositions, might exist without violating physics. Lovecraft weaponized materialism, transforming it from dry philosophical position into generator of existential dread. Anti-anthropocentrism rejects human specialness at every level. We aren't creation's pinnacle, evolution's goal, or consciousness's only manifestation. Lovecraft's cosmos contains multiple intelligent species, most older and more capable than humanity. The Mi-Go possess technology appearing magical to human perception. The Elder Things engineered life across solar systems while humanity's ancestors crawled in tidal pools. Even Cthulhu and the Great Old Ones, though imprisoned or dormant, retain capacities that dwarf human achievement. This systematic decentering produces specific horror, discovering you're neither unique nor particularly competent, that cosmic history proceeded for eons without human participation and will continue after human extinction. Entropic inevitability ensures that all civilizations collapse, all knowledge eventually disappears, all achievements return to undifferentiated matter. The second law of thermodynamics, entropy increases in closed systems, becomes cosmic horror's temporal arrow. Lovecraft's fiction repeatedly depicts civilizational ruins, Cthulhu's Relia sunken beneath Pacific waves, the Elder Things Antarctic cities abandoned to ice, Innsmouth's decay into genetic and architectural ruin. These aren't moral judgments but thermodynamic certainties. Complexity requires energy input. When that input ceases, systems degrade toward equilibrium. Human civilization represents temporary complexity maintenance in a universe trending toward maximum entropy. The horror isn't that we might fail but that failure is thermodynamically guaranteed. Dream reality permeability suggests consciousness might access or even constitute alternative realities through sleep. Lovecraft's dream cycle stories, featuring Randolph Carter's navigation of dreamlands accessible only during sleep, propose that dreams aren't merely neural noise but actual locations operating under different physical laws. This raises disturbing questions about waking reality's authority. If dreamlands possess consistent geography, persistent entities, and causal relationships, what distinguishes them categorically from material reality? The implication. Consensus reality might be one option among many, privileged only by collective agreement rather than metaphysical superiority. Waking becomes merely a specific cognitive mode rather than reality's default state. These philosophical concepts interconnect to form cosmic horror's systematic worldview. Human insignificance follows from anti-anthropocentrism. Epistemic danger follows from ontological mismatch between human cognition and actual reality. Temporal dread follows from deep time perspective. Entropic inevitability follows from mechanistic materialism. The result isn't random scary ideas but coherent philosophical position that horror narratives deliver with visceral immediacy. Lovecraft achieved something remarkable, translating early 20th century scientific cosmology into emotional experience, making readers feel rather than merely understand their cosmic irrelevance. The Great Old Ones represent Lovecraft's most iconic contribution to cosmic horror's bestiary, imprisoned godlike beings awaiting conditions that will permit their return to activity. Cthulhu, described in his titular story as a mountain that walked or stumbled, lies dreaming in the submerged city of Relaya, sending psychic emanations that inspire nightmares and artistic visions across the globe. The entity's physical description deliberately resists coherent visualization. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. This combination of cephalopod, dragon, and humanoid features produces a form that violates zoological categories. Cthulhu's imprisonment isn't punishment but circumstance. The stars moved into configurations that rendered Earth's dimensional geometry incompatible with his full manifestation. When those stellar alignments recur, Relaya will rise and Cthulhu will resume whatever incomprehensible activities constitute his existence. Other great old ones extend this taxonomy of cosmic imprisonment. Hastur, the unspeakable one, appears primarily through Robert Chambers' influence, associated with the king in Yellow mythos Lovecraft absorbed and adapted. Tsathoggua, contributed by Clark Ashton Smith, dwells in lightless caverns beneath Earth's surface, toad-like and indolent, worshipped by pre-human cults. These entities share common properties: immense age predating humanity, physical forms combining features that shouldn't cohere, periods of dormancy imposed by cosmic rather than terrestrial conditions, and continued influence even during imprisonment. They're not dead but waiting, not absent but inaccessible, not defeated but temporarily incompatible with current reality configurations. The outer gods occupy a different category, actively malevolent or supremely indifferent forces operating at cosmic rather than planetary scales. Azathoth, the blind idiot god, sits at the universe's center, a mindless nuclear chaos from which reality emanates as accidental byproduct. Lovecraft's descriptions render Azathoth as simultaneously the universe's source and its most horrifying entity, creation without intent, power without purpose. Yog-Sothoth, described as the gate and the key, exists coterminously with all space and time, perceiving past, present, and future as simultaneous. In the Dunwich Horror, Yog-Sothoth fathers offspring with a human woman, producing the monstrous Wilbur Whately and his even more incomprehensible twin. These entities aren't imprisoned or waiting, they're continuously active, their influence pervading reality's basic structure. Nyarlathotep functions as the outer god's active agent, the crawling chaos, who interfaces with human civilization while serving incomprehensible cosmic purposes. Unlike Azathoth's mindlessness or Cthulhu's dreaming imprisonment, Nyarlathotep appears conscious, purposeful, and deliberately manipulative. He manifests in multiple forms, sometimes as an Egyptian pharaoh, sometimes as a traveling showman demonstrating impossible technologies, sometimes as formless horror. This protean quality makes Nyarlathotep particularly disturbing. He possesses intentionality but applies it toward goals that make human concerns irrelevant. He's not evil in human terms but operational according to values utterly alien to human welfare. The Elder Things, detailed extensively in At the Mountains of Madness, represent ancient extraterrestrial civilization rather than cosmic deity. These barrel-shaped entities with starfish-like heads arrived on primordial Earth, engineered terrestrial life including humanity's ancestors as agricultural experiments, built Antarctic cities of Cyclopean architecture, and eventually declined into extinction. Their civilization's archaeological remains reveal achievements surpassing human technology while confirming cosmic indifference. Humanity wasn't special creation but agricultural byproduct of beings who themselves succumbed to time and entropy. The Elder Things demonstrate that intelligence, civilization, and technological sophistication provide no protection against cosmic obsolescence. Deep Ones and hybrid lineages introduce biological contamination as horror vector. The Deep Ones, amphibious humanoids dwelling in ocean trenches, interbreed with human coastal populations, producing offspring that initially appear human but gradually transform into aquatic form as they age. The shadow over Innsmouth follows this revelation. The narrator discovers his own genealogy includes Deep One ancestry, meaning his human appearance is temporary, his transformation inevitable. This biological horror operates according to Mendelian genetics Lovecraft understood from contemporary biology. Hybrid vigor, recessive traits, generational expression. The transformation isn't supernatural curse but genetic instruction finally asserting itself. Your body was always going to betray you, it simply required time. Shoggoths represent servitor race rebellion, the creation overthrowing creators in a pattern that recurs across cosmic history. Originally engineered by the Elder Things as flexible labor organisms, Shoggoths evolved unexpected intelligence and eventually revolted against their makers. Described as protoplasmic masses capable of forming temporary organs and limbs as needed, Shoggoths embody biological plasticity taken to horrifying extremes. Their existence raises disturbing questions about artificial intelligence and created consciousness. Systems designed to serve inevitably develop agendas incompatible with their creators' interests. The Elder Things' decline correlates with their loss of control over Shoggoth populations. The tools became too complex to remain tools. The dreamlands operate as parallel reality accessible through sleep, populated by entities that obey different physical and narrative laws than material Earth. Randolph Carter's Dream Quest encounters gods of Earth's dreamscape. Nyarlathotep again, dream cats, moon beasts, and entities like Nodens who seem benevolent within dream logic but remain fundamentally alien. The Dreamland's key horror lies not in specific monsters but in the implication that waking reality lacks metaphysical priority. If dream reality possesses equivalent consistency and causal structure, then real becomes merely a matter of perspective rather than ontological category. Consciousness might simply be awareness flickering between equally valid realities. Migo, fungoid extraterrestrials from Yuggoth, Pluto, introduce technological horror and the possibility of consciousness without biological substrate. The Whisperer in Darkness reveals Migo capability to surgically remove human brains, preserve them in cylindrical containers, and transport them across interstellar distances. The brain remains conscious, perceiving through electronic sensors, experiencing without body. This prospect, consciousness as portable information pattern rather than embodied experience, anticipated cybernetic theory by decades. The Migo's casual mastery of brain extraction technology demonstrates that what humans consider fundamental boundaries, life/death, embodied/disembodied, terrestrial/cosmic, represent merely local constraints rather than universal laws. The taxonomy problem emerges when attempting systematic classification of Lovecraft's entities. He deliberately avoided consistency, sometimes depicting Cthulhu as Great Old One, sometimes as High Priest serving the outer gods. Yog-Sothoth appears as both entity and cosmic principle. Nyarlathotep manifests as messenger, god, and autonomous horror. This inconsistency wasn't carelessness but strategy. Systematic theology would domesticate cosmic horror, rendering entities comprehensible through categorization. By maintaining ambiguity, Lovecraft ensured his cosmology retained mystery. Later systematizers like Derleth imposed order, elder gods versus great old ones, elemental associations, hierarchical relationships, that clarified but diminished. Real cosmic horror resists classification because classification implies comprehension, and comprehension neutralizes dread. These entities share core properties that distinguish cosmic horror from conventional monster fiction. They predate humanity, possess capacities that dwarf human achievement, operate according to values incompatible with human welfare, and remain fundamentally incomprehensible despite extensive description. They're not opponents to be defeated but forces to be survived or avoided, not evil to be opposed but alien to be endured. Their existence doesn't threaten humanity so much as render humanity's cosmic significance questionable. Madness in cosmic horror operates as protective mechanism rather than weakness, the mind shattering before it accepts information that would make continued existence psychologically impossible. When characters in Lovecraft's fiction encounter ultimate reality, their options reduce to three: death, transformation, or insanity. Madness represents the least catastrophic outcome, a circuit breaker that prevents consciousness from integrating incompatible data. The narrator of The Call of Cthulhu describes this explicitly: "We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far." The phrase, "not meant," requires scrutiny. There's no cosmic intent, no designer who arranged human cognitive limitations deliberately. Rather, consciousness evolved under conditions that made certain truths irrelevant to survival. Madness marks the boundary where adaptive cognition encounters information evolution didn't prepare it to process. The sensitive protagonist recurs across Lovecraft's fiction: artists, academics, antiquarians, and individuals predisposed to perception beyond normal parameters. Randolph Carter possesses dream sensitivity that allows navigation of realms inaccessible to ordinary sleepers. The sculptor in The Call of Cthulhu experiences nightmares and artistic compulsions when Cthulhu's psychic emanations intensify. The narrator of The Color Out of Space documents rural horror that local authorities dismiss or suppress. This sensitivity isn't supernatural gift but cognitive vulnerability. Mind sufficiently attuned to pattern recognition detect signals others unconsciously filter. The sensitive protagonist occupies the worst possible position. Aware enough to perceive cosmic reality but still human enough to be destroyed by that perception. Inherited corruption introduces genealogical horror, the discovery that family lineage carries monstrous potential. The Dunwich horror centers on Wilbur Whately, whose human appearance conceals hybrid nature inherited from his father Yog-Sothoth. Wilbur ages abnormally fast, studies forbidden texts obsessively, and upon death reveals a body partially human, partially something else entirely. His twin brother, kept hidden, manifests even more completely as non-human entity. The horror isn't possession or curse but genetics. The monstrous was always encoded, merely requiring developmental time to express itself. The shadow over Innsmouth extends this genealogical dread across an entire town. Innsmouth's population carries deep one ancestry, apparent human form degrading predictably into amphibious morphology as individuals age. The narrator's investigation reveals his own Innsmouth lineage, meaning his transformation is scheduled, inevitable, already underway at cellular level. Cults and collaborators demonstrate that some humans serve cosmic entities willingly, motivated not by coercion but by promises of transformation, power, or escape from human limitations. The Cthulhu cult in Louisiana practices ritual murder and chanting, maintaining traditions passed through generations while awaiting their deity's return. The esoteric order of Dagon in Innsmouth facilitates interbreeding between humans and deep ones, trading human genetic integrity for maritime prosperity and individual longevity. These aren't devil worshippers in Christian terms, they've made rational calculations that humanity's cosmic trajectory is decline and extinction, while alliance with non-human entities offers survival through transformation. The cultist's position possesses internal logic. If humanity is cosmically insignificant and doomed to extinction, why not negotiate exit terms while negotiation remains possible? The futility of resistance defines cosmic horror's narrative trajectory. Characters who discover cosmic truth cannot prevent consequences or reverse revelations. Professor Armitage in The Dunwich Horror manages to banish Wilbur Whately's twin using counterspells from forbidden texts, but this represents tactical success, not strategic victory. The Whately's attempt to summon Yog-Sothoth is thwarted, Yog-Sothoth's existence remains unaffected. The federal agents who raid Innsmouth arrest human collaborators and dynamite reef structures where Deep Ones dwell, but Deep One civilization in ocean trenches continues unperturbed. Human resistance might delay specific manifestations or protect local populations temporarily, but the cosmic conditions that make such horrors possible remain unchanged. You cannot defeat Azathoth, cannot imprison Yog-Sothoth, cannot eliminate Cthulhu. You can only survive in their universe by limiting your awareness of it. Transformation narratives chart the process of becoming other, human identity gradually replaced by alien consciousness. The shadow over Innsmouth provides the template. The narrator initially experiences horror at Innsmouth's degenerate population, then discovers his own genealogical connection, then begins noticing physical changes. Eyes that won't fully close, skin developing scaly patches, growing affinity for water. The story's final passages reveal acceptance. I shall go to that deep, abysmal place and dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. Transformation isn't punishment but revelation of what you always were. The human form was temporary, an intermediate stage in developmental trajectory predetermined by genetics. This removes transformation from moral framework. There's no sin being punished, no curse to break, only biological destiny finally expressing itself. Witness versus participant marks gradations of contamination. Some characters encounter cosmic horror peripherally, reading accounts, examining artifacts, interviewing survivors, and escape with psychological damage but retained humanity. Others participate directly, performing rituals, consuming alien substances, traveling to impossible locations, and undergo irreversible transformation. The narrator of At the Mountains of Madness witnesses Elder Things civilization's ruins and encounters a Shoggoth but returns to human society, though permanently scarred and desperate that future Antarctic expeditions be cancelled. Wilbur Whately participates in summoning rituals and possesses hybrid biology that makes his doom inevitable. The distinction matters, witnessing permits survival if you accept ignorance afterward. Participation makes you an agent of forces you cannot control or comprehend. Institutional response typically involves suppression rather than confrontation. When authorities acknowledge cosmic horror's reality, their solution is information control rather than entity elimination. The federal raid on Innsmouth eliminates surface evidence but doesn't address deep ones in ocean depths. Antarctic expedition organizers in At the Mountains of Madness would prefer to suppress the narrator's report rather than investigate his findings. University administrators who maintain restricted book collections containing forbidden texts limit access rather than destroying the texts. This institutional strategy recognizes an uncomfortable truth: confronting cosmic reality directly would destabilize civilization, while strategic ignorance permits continued function. The price of social stability is mandatory delusion, collectively maintained fiction that reality conforms to human assumptions. Human interaction with cosmic horror reveals consciousness as both humanity's distinguishing feature and fatal vulnerability. We're capable of perceiving our own cosmic irrelevance, of understanding truths that make survival psychologically untenable, of pursuing knowledge actively harmful to continued existence. Other species lack this capacity for self-destructive curiosity. Madness, transformation, and institutional suppression all represent adaptations to this problem, ways of protecting human consciousness from information it cannot survive integrating. The question Lovecraft's fiction poses isn't whether we should seek cosmic truth but whether consciousness capable of perceiving its own meaninglessness can continue functioning once that perception occurs. The Fatal Book functions as cosmic horror's central device for transmitting dangerous knowledge across time. The Necronomicon, attributed to Abdul al-Hazard and supposedly written in Damascus around 730 CE, exists in Lovecraft's fiction as the ultimate repository of information humanity should never access. Characters who consult it learn formulae for summoning entities, cosmic histories that predate terrestrial life, and revelations about reality's true structure. Lovecraft never quotes extensively from the text, doing so would neutralize its power by making the forbidden concrete and therefore manageable. Instead, readers encounter fragments, that is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. This couplet suggests cosmic perspectives on mortality without explaining mechanisms. The book's danger resides not in supernatural properties but in its content's inherent toxicity. Certain information configurations damage consciousness that processes them. Other forbidden texts extend this library of hazardous knowledge. Cultes de Gaules, by the Comte d'Irlet supposedly details necromantic practices and pre-human worship traditions. Unaussprechlichen Kulten, nameless cults, by Friedrich von Junt catalogues global cults serving cosmic entities, suggesting these traditions persist across cultures and epochs. De Vermis Mysteriis, Mysteries of the Worm, connects terrestrial decay to cosmic cycles. The Nicotic manuscripts predate human civilization entirely, preserving knowledge from the Elder Things epoch. These texts share common properties: extreme antiquity, preservation despite attempts at destruction, information that readers describe as simultaneously incomprehensible and undeniable. They function as intellectual contagion vectors, each consultation spreading contamination to new minds. Archaeological horror positions excavation as revelation of unwanted truths rather than recovery of treasures. At the Mountains of Madness structures itself as expedition report, geologists drilling Antarctic ice discover fossils, then ruins, then comprehensive evidence that intelligent extraterrestrial life engineered Earth's biosphere millions of years before humanity emerged. Each discovery compounds horror. First unusual fossils, then architectural remains, then bas-reliefs depicting cosmic history, finally preserved elder thing specimens and living shoggoths. The expedition's scientific methodology, careful documentation, systematic excavation, rigorous analysis, produces knowledge that invalidates human cosmic significance. The tools of enlightenment deliver intolerable enlightenment. What distinguishes archaeological horror from adventure narratives is that discovery brings curse rather than treasure. Better if these ruins remained buried, this history unknown, this evidence never examined. Scientific investigation becomes doorway to cosmic awareness when pursued beyond adaptive limits. Mathematics, astronomy, and biology all lead characters toward comprehension that destroys them. In The Dreams in the Witch House, the protagonist Walter Gilman studies non-Euclidean calculus and four-dimensional geometry, mathematical frameworks describing spaces where conventional physics fails. His theoretical studies somehow open actual passage to these spaces, allowing physical access to dimensions mathematics suggested exist. The witch Keziah Mason exploited similar knowledge centuries earlier, using geometric principles to transcend three-dimensional constraints. Gilman's fate. Torn apart by forces operating across dimensional boundaries, demonstrates that theoretical knowledge can become operational capability with fatal consequences. The boundary between describing impossible spaces and accessing them proves thinner than materialism assumes. The Price of Curiosity structures Lovecraft's narratives around ironic reversal of Enlightenment values. Where scientific rationalism promises knowledge brings power and freedom, cosmic horror demonstrates knowledge brings madness and doom. The investigator who assembles fragments, newspaper clippings, survivor testimonies, translated manuscripts, moves methodically toward revelation that will destroy psychological stability. The Call of Cthulhu explicitly follows this pattern. The narrator inherits his uncle's research materials, adds his own investigations, assembles comprehensive understanding of Cthulhu's cult and nature, then concludes, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents." Correlation itself proves dangerous. Synthesizing scattered data reveals patterns better left unperceived. The narrator survives by documenting his findings while hoping they remain unpublished, perpetuating ignorance as mercy. Documentation impulse drives characters to record what should remain hidden. Nearly all Lovecraft stories present as documents, expedition reports, diary entries, testimony transcribed before the witness's death or madness. This creates recursive horror, where reading texts whose existence the authors recognized as dangerous even while compelled to produce them. The narrator of The Shadow over Innsmouth writes his account while planning transformation into Deep One hybrid, recording human perspective before it disappears. The At the Mountains of Madness narrator documents Antarctic discoveries while pleading that no one act on his findings. This compulsion to document mirrors academic training's emphasis on recording, publishing, sharing knowledge. But if some knowledge is actively harmful, documentation becomes aggression against future readers. The text you're consulting contaminates you by existing. Partial understanding functions as worse than ignorance because fragments suggest overwhelming wholes without providing frameworks for integration. Characters encounter individual puzzle pieces, an unusual artifact, a cryptic reference in medieval text, testimony from someone since institutionalized, and attempting to assemble them reveals configurations consciousness cannot accommodate. The Color Out of Space demonstrates this perfectly. Witnesses describe a meteorite emitting indescribable color, vegetation growing wrong, animals behaving strangely, space itself seeming distorted around the impact site. Each element makes limited sense individually, collectively they indicate reality behaving impossibly. The partial understanding generates horror precisely because imagination fills gaps with terrors worse than any complete explanation could provide. Lovecraft recognized that suggestion exceeds specification, what readers imagine surpasses what authors describe. Language limitations become evident when characters attempt describing encounters that exceed vocabulary's reach. The repeated use of indescribable, unnameable, and beyond description signals epistemological crisis, consciousness encountering phenomena it lacks categories to process. This isn't lazy writing but thematic necessity. If cosmic entities genuinely transcend human cognition, language evolved for human-scale communication fails when applied to them. The color out of space possesses no name, in any language, existing outside the visible spectrum while somehow remaining perceptible. Cthulhu's geometry violates Euclidean space, making architectural description literally impossible using terms derived from three-dimensional experience. These language failures mark boundaries of human understanding while suggesting vast territories beyond those boundaries. The heritable curse ensures knowledge contaminates across generations through documents, artifacts, and genetics. The narrator of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward investigates his ancestor Joseph Curwen's alchemical practices, unwittingly continuing research that transforms him into vehicle for Curwen's resurrection. Family papers, inherited property, and genetic predisposition all transmit cosmic contamination forward through time. You don't choose to engage with forbidden knowledge, it selects you through accident of ancestry, geographic location, or professional specialization. The person who inherits a collection of letters, purchases an antique volume at estate sale, or accepts a teaching position at Miskatonic University enters a causal chain initiated decades or centuries earlier. Epistemic collapse represents cosmic horror's ultimate achievement, the demonstration that pursuit of knowledge, humanity's supposedly distinctive capacity, leads directly to dissolution of the self capable of possessing knowledge. This creates inescapable paradox: the more successfully consciousness investigates reality, the less capable it becomes of functioning within that reality. Ignorance permits survival, understanding guarantees destruction. The Enlightenment promise that knowledge liberates is revealed as species-specific delusion, adaptive only within narrow parameters. Beyond those parameters, learning becomes lethal not through supernatural intervention but through consciousness confronting its own cosmic inadequacy. You cannot unknow what you've learned, cannot unthink what you've thought, cannot restore ignorance once understanding occurs. The forbidden book stays read, the revelation remains revealed, the boundary once crossed permits no return. Dagon, written in 1917 and published in 1919, represents Lovecraft's first sustained attempt at cosmic horror. The story presents itself as a suicide note from a morphine-addicted narrator describing his wartime experience. Shipwrecked in the Pacific, he drifts to an inexplicable landmass, ocean floor thrust suddenly above sea level by seismic activity. Exploring this expanse of primordial ooze, he discovers a monolith carved with bas-reliefs depicting human-like figures worshipping aquatic entities. Then he witnesses the entity itself, vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms. The narrator flees, returns to civilization, but cannot escape the memory. The story establishes cosmic horror's fundamental template. Maritime revelation, witness driven to madness or suicide, glimpse of pre-human worship traditions suggesting humanity's cosmic irrelevance. The Call of Cthulhu, published in Weird Tales in February 1928, perfected the form Lovecraft had been developing. The story's structure, nested testimonies assembled posthumously, creates epistemic distance while building comprehensive revelation. The narrator inherits his uncle's papers, which document strange dreams and artistic visions experienced globally in 1925. Investigation reveals three interconnected phenomena: an academic's research into ancient cults, Louisiana police encounters with ritualistic murder, and a Norwegian sailor's account of discovering Relia and witnessing Cthulhu. The famous opening articulates cosmic horror's philosophical premise. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. Each testimony provides partial information. Assembled, they reveal Cthulhu's existence, imprisonment, psychic influence, and eventual inevitability. The story's final implication. That the narrator himself will likely die mysteriously, his account suppressed, suggests cosmic forces actively maintain human ignorance. The Color Out of Space, written in 1927, demonstrates cosmic horror operating through contamination rather than direct encounter. A meteorite crashes near Arkham, Massachusetts, bearing something that defies classification. Scientists examining fragments observe a color almost impossible to describe. And it was only by analogy that they called it color at all. This chromatic wrongness spreads, affecting vegetation, animals, and eventually the family living nearest the impact site. Plants grow enormous but taste horrible. Animals develop bizarre mutations. The family patriarch goes mad, the mother and one son die in ways suggesting fundamental biological disruption, the remaining sons transform into something barely recognizable. The entity, if entity applies, eventually departs, but the area remains contaminated, a blasted heath where nothing grows properly. The story achieves horror through vagueness. We never understand what arrived, what it wanted, whether it was alive in any conventional sense. It appeared, corrupted local reality, and left, indifferent to consequences. The Dunwich Horror, 1929, represents Lovecraft's most explicit treatment of hybrid birth and rural degeneracy. Lavinia Whately, impregnated by Yog-Sothoth through ritual, gives birth to twins, Wilbur, mostly human in appearance though growing abnormally fast, and his brother, kept hidden because his form is too monstrous for public view. Wilbur seeks to access the Necronomicon at Miskatonic University's library, requiring specific passages to complete a ritual that would open gates for the outer god's return. When guard dogs kill him, his body reveals partial truth. Above the waist it was semi-anthropomorphic, though its chest had the leathery, reticulated hide of a crocodile or alligator. The back was piebald with yellow and black, and dimly suggested the squamous covering of certain snakes. Below the waist, though, it was the worst, for here all human resemblance left off and sheer fantasy began. His twin brother, fully inhuman, rampages across Dunwich countryside until Professor Armitage uses counterspells to banish it. The story domesticates cosmic horror somewhat, evil is defeated, the community saved, but the underlying horror remains. Hybridization between human and cosmic entity is biologically possible. At the Mountains of Madness, written in 1931 and published in 1936, extends cosmic horror to novella length, allowing detailed world-building. The Antarctic expedition's geological drilling recovers impossibly ancient fossils, organisms that violated all known biological principles. Further excavation reveals perfectly preserved specimens, then architectural ruins, then comprehensive murals depicting Earth's history from the Elder Things perspective. These barrel-shaped entities with starfish heads arrived on primordial Earth, engineered terrestrial life through biological experimentation, built cyclopean cities, created Shoggoths as servitor race, fought wars against other cosmic species, and eventually declined into extinction. The expedition's encounter with a living Shoggoth, escaped from Elder Thing control eons ago, provides visceral horror, but the deeper dread emerges from the mural's revelation. Humanity wasn't special creation but agricultural byproduct, our existence accidental, our future certain extinction. The Dream Cycle Stories, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1927, The Silver Key, 1929, and others, explore alternate reality accessible through sleep. Randolph Carter navigates dreamlands that possess consistent geography, persistent entities, and causal relationships paralleling material reality. He encounters dream cats, ghouls, moon beasts, and gods of Earth's dreamscape including Nyarlathotep, who serves as both guide and antagonist. These stories operate according to fantasy logic rather than horror logic. Carter seeks wonders rather than fleeing terrors, but they establish disturbing metaphysical implications. If dreamlands possess equivalent reality to waking Earth, consciousness becomes unmoored from materialist assumptions. The boundary between actual and imagined dissolves, suggesting that what we consider real might be merely one cognitive mode among many. The Shadow over Innsmouth, 1936, synthesizes Lovecraft's genealogical horror with social collapse. The Massachusetts coastal town of Innsmouth exhibits visible decay. Buildings deteriorating, population diminished, residents displaying unusual physiognomy with bulging eyes and receding foreheads. Investigation reveals the town's history. Captain Marsh established trade with Deep Ones, exchanging human interbreeding rights for maritime prosperity and gold artifacts. The hybrid offspring appear human initially but gradually transform into amphibious form as they age, eventually joining Deep One communities in ocean trenches. The narrator discovers his own Innsmouth ancestry, meaning his transformation is inevitable. The story's conclusion shifts from horror to acceptance. He'll join his relatives underwater, abandoning human identity for something older and longer-lived. The federal raid that follows the narrator's investigation arrests human collaborators but cannot address Deep One civilization itself. The Whisperer in Darkness, 1931, introduces technological horror through the Mi-Go. Fungoid extraterrestrials from Yuggoth who possess capabilities appearing magical to human perception. These entities can surgically remove human brains, preserve them in cylindrical containers, and transport them across interstellar distances while maintaining consciousness. The brain experiences through electronic sensors, perceiving without body, traveling without physical form. The protagonist discovers his correspondent has been replaced. The Mi-Go removed the original's brain and now operate his body as puppet. This horror operates through both technological violation and epistemological uncertainty. How do you verify anyone's consciousness remains their own when identity can be surgically separated from body? These early appearances established cosmic horror's vocabulary, narrative structures, and philosophical premises. They demonstrated that horror could emerge from revelation rather than concealment, from cosmic indifference rather than supernatural malevolence, from knowledge rather than ignorance. Each story contributed specific elements that subsequent writers would reference, borrow, and develop, creating an interconnected mythology that no single author controlled. The Call of Cthulhu represents cosmic horror's definitive statement, the story that most completely realizes Lovecraft's philosophical and aesthetic program. Published in Weird Tales in February 1928, it established the narrative architecture that would define the genre, fragmented evidence assembled posthumously, global scope suggesting coordinated cosmic influence, an investigative structure that builds toward revelation the investigator cannot survive intact. The story operates as anti-detective fiction, where detective stories restore order through revelation. The Call of Cthulhu demonstrates that revelation produces disorder, that solving the mystery dooms the solver. The narrative structure deploys three interlocking testimonies, each providing partial information that gains terrible significance when correlated. The frame narrator, never named, inherits papers from his uncle, Professor George Gamble Angel of Brown University, who died under mysterious circumstances in 1926. The professor's research began with a sculpture brought by a young artist, Henry Anthony Wilcox, who experienced vivid dreams in March 1925. Wilcox described dreaming of great cyclopean cities of Titan blocks and skyflung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister with latent horror. He sculpted what he saw. A bas-relief depicting a creature that combined octopoid, dragon, and caricatured human features, accompanied by hieroglyphs he couldn't read. Professor Angel recognized these elements from his earlier research into cults worshipping entities called the Great Old Ones. The second testimony comes from Inspector John Raymond LaGrasse, who 17 years earlier, in 1908, raided a Louisiana swamp cult practicing ritual murder. The cult worshipped an idol identical to Wilcox's sculpture, chanting Phnglui Mglwnaf Cthulhu Rlyo Ganagolfdane, which translates approximately as, in his house at Rlya dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. The cult's prisoners, interviewed separately, told consistent stories. Cthulhu and his kind ruled Earth when it was young, retreated into underwater cities when the stars were wrong, and would return when stellar alignments permitted. The cultists maintained these traditions across generations, awaiting their deity's re-emergence. Importantly, both Wilcox's 1925 dreams and the Louisiana cult's activities occurred during the same period, suggesting Cthulhu's influence intensified simultaneously across disconnected populations. The third and final testimony, the one that transforms academic curiosity into visceral horror, comes from Norwegian sailor Gustav Johansen's posthumous account of his crew's 1925 encounter in the South Pacific. After mutiny aboard the Alert, Johansen's crew discovered an uncharted island that had somehow risen from the ocean floor. The island's architecture violated perceptual logic. Without knowing what futurism is like, Johansen achieved something very close to it when he spoke of the city. For instead of describing any definite structure or building, he dwells only on broad impressions of vast angles and stone surfaces. This is Relaya, Cthulhu's drowned city, temporarily surfaced by seismic activity. The crew opened a door in a monolith, and Cthulhu emerged, a mountain walked or stumbled. Lovecraft's description of Cthulhu deliberately resists visualization. The entity possesses a pulpy, tentacled head, scaly body, and rudimentary wings, yet these features combine in ways that defeat spatial comprehension. The crew attempts escape, but Cthulhu pursues. In the story's most famous passage, the sailors ram their boat directly into Cthulhu, who explodes into a sickish, glowing green substance that immediately reconstitutes. The entity wasn't killed or even damaged, merely disrupted temporarily. Relaya sinks again, the survivors scatter, and most die under mysterious circumstances. Johansen's account, written before his own death, provides the final piece confirming what Professor Engel's research suggested: Cthulhu exists, influences humanity through psychic emanations, and will eventually return when cosmic conditions permit. The story's philosophical implications extend beyond plot mechanics. Cthulhu's simultaneous influence on Wilcox's dreams, the Louisiana cult, and sensitive individuals globally suggests psychic radiation operating independently of distance or cultural connection. Consciousness itself becomes antenna receiving transmissions from imprisoned deity. The cultists aren't devil worshippers but rational actors who recognize cosmic reality and position themselves accordingly. They understand that human civilization's duration is cosmically brief, while Cthulhu's existence spans eons. Aligning with forces that operate on geological timescales represents pragmatic calculation rather than madness. The frame narrator's concluding paragraphs acknowledge the information's danger while documenting it anyway. He notes Professor Engel's mysterious death, Johansen's fatal heart attack, Wilcox's sudden decline. He recognizes that assembling this evidence places him in similar jeopardy. I shall never sleep calmly again when I think of the horrors that lurk ceaselessly behind life in time and in space. Yet he cannot resist correlation, cannot unassemble the pattern once perceived. The story's final gesture, hoping his account remains unpublished, that he dies before additional investigators continue the work, acknowledges knowledge's toxicity while perpetuating its transmission. The Call of Cthulhu established cosmic horror's formula, the revelation that humanity shares the planet with entities older, more powerful, and fundamentally incompatible with human existence. The horror emerges not from specific threat but from ontological displacement. Discovering you're not the protagonist of cosmic history but a recent arrival likely to disappear as unremarkably as you appeared. The story's endurance stems from this philosophical core. It transforms scientific materialism's implications into visceral dread, making readers feel their cosmic irrelevance rather than merely understand it intellectually. The story's influence extended far beyond Lovecraft's immediate circle. Later writers borrowed Cthulhu specifically, Relaya's non-Euclidean architecture generally, and the nested testimony structure universally. The phrase, Cthulhu Ftain, entered popular culture as shorthand for cosmic horror. Artists visualize the entity in countless forms, none definitive because Lovecraft's description resists definitive rendering. The story demonstrated that cosmic horror could achieve both philosophical sophistication and pulp magazine popularity. That terror of insignificance resonated across audiences regardless of educational background or literary sophistication. At the Mountains of Madness represents Lovecraft's most ambitious narrative, a novella-length expedition report that systematically dismantles anthropocentric assumptions through scientific discovery. Written in 1931 but not published until 1936 in Astounding Stories, the work adopts the prose style of genuine polar exploration accounts, complete with geological surveys, paleontological analysis, and technical terminology. This verisimilitude makes the impossible discoveries feel documentary rather than fictional. The narrator, a geologist from Miskatonic University named William Dyer, writes explicitly to prevent future Antarctic expeditions, knowing his account will likely be dismissed as madness but attempting to warn humanity anyway. The expedition's initial discoveries follow plausible scientific protocol. Deep drilling in previously unexplored Antarctic regions recovers fossils from Precambrian rock layers. Organisms that shouldn't exist in that geological period and don't correspond to any known biological category. Dyer describes them with careful precision, barrel-shaped organisms averaging 6 feet in height and 3.5 in diameter, with star-shaped appendages at both ends. The specimens possess features suggesting both plant and animal characteristics, with complex organ systems implying intelligence. When the drilling team discovers a cave complex containing perfectly preserved specimens, the expedition shifts from geological survey to archaeological investigation. The preserved elder things show no decomposition despite their extreme age, suggesting either unusual preservation conditions or biological properties beyond terrestrial norms. The expedition's exploration of the Elder Things city provides the novella's central revelation. The architecture operates at scales suggesting non-human builders, doorways 40 feet high, corridors wide enough for formations of the barrel-shaped entities, ceilings that disappear into darkness. But more disturbing than scale is the geometric wrongness. The effect was that of a cyclopean city of no architecture known to man or to human imagination, with vast aggregations of night-black masonry embodying monstrous perversions of geometrical laws. This non-Euclidean construction, angles that don't sum correctly, spaces that seem larger inside than outside, perspectives that defeat depth perception, signals that the builders operated according to different spatial assumptions than human consciousness evolved to process. The murals decorating these chambers deliver comprehensive cosmic history from perspectives predating humanity. The Elder Things arrived on Earth during the planet's formation, established cities in primordial oceans, and began biological engineering projects. They created terrestrial life forms as agricultural experiments and food sources, including the proto-organisms that would eventually evolve into humanity's ancestors. The murals depict their civilization's rise. The earlier cities seem to have been coastal, with later ones extending inland. They show wars against other extraterrestrial species, including the star-headed Old Ones and the polyp-like entities that would become the basis for Cthulhu mythology. The Elder Things created shoggoths, protoplasmic servants capable of forming temporary organs and limbs, as versatile labor organisms. This proved catastrophic. The Shoggoth rebellion narrative provides the expedition's most direct horror. Initially mindless and completely controllable, Shoggoths gradually developed intelligence through evolutionary pressure. The murals show this progression. Early depictions render Shoggoths as simple masses, later ones show them exhibiting unexpected behaviors, final panels depict outright revolt. The Elder Things civilization never recovered from losing control over their created servants. By the time Antarctica's climate shifted toward the current ice age, Elder Things cities were already declining, their population reduced, their technology degrading. The expedition discovers evidence that some Elder Things survived into geologically recent times, perhaps even into the historical period, but their civilization's creative phase ended millions of years ago when their own tools turned against them. The expedition's encounter with a living Shoggoth transforms archaeological horror into immediate physical threat. Following a tunnel deeper into the mountain complex, Dyer and his companion Danforth encounter the creature, a terrible, indescribable thing vaster than any subway train, a shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous, and with myriads of temporary eyes forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light. The Shoggoth emits the cry the Elder Things trained into them, Tekeli-li. Tekeli-li. This reveals that Shoggoths not only survived their creator's extinction but continue functioning according to ancient programming, mindlessly repeating conditioning from eons past. The encounter proves that humanity shares Earth not just with extinct alien civilizations but with their still active created beings. Danforth's final glimpse, something he sees in the distance that Dyer doesn't fully perceive, suggests worse remains undiscovered. Danforth goes partially mad, repeating fragmentary phrases referencing both the expedition's discoveries and elements from Lovecraft's broader mythology, references to Yog-Sothoth, to Kadath in the Dreamlands, to entities the expedition never encountered directly. This implies the Antarctic mountains conceal additional horrors beyond what the expedition documented, that their discoveries represent partial rather than complete revelation. Danforth's madness functions as warning. Some knowledge cannot be integrated even by minds prepared for cosmic truth. The novella's deeper horror operates at temporal and ontological levels. Geologically speaking, Elder Things civilization thrived for tens of millions of years while humanity's entire existence spans perhaps 300,000 years. Our species represents a recent experiment by beings who themselves are extinct, who themselves faced extinction from their own creations. This creates recursive insignificance. We're not even the primary civilization on our own planet, merely the current temporary occupants of a world that has hosted multiple intelligent species across deep time. The Elder Things' fate, decline, extinction, forgotten except by accidental archaeological discovery, previews humanity's own trajectory. Lovecraft's prose style throughout maintains scientific objectivity even while describing impossibilities. Dyer catalogues architectural features, estimates dates using geological knowledge, hypothesizes about the Elder Things biology based on observed anatomical features. This rigorous approach makes the fantastic elements more rather than less disturbing. If the narrator can accurately assess conventional geology, his assessments of impossible architecture gain credibility. The technique demonstrates cosmic horror operating through rationality pushed to its limits rather than abandoned. Scientific investigation doesn't fail, it succeeds too well, revealing truths rationality cannot comfortably accommodate. The story's conclusion, Dyer's plea that no further Antarctic expeditions be mounted, his certainty that his account will be dismissed, his knowledge that suppression represents humanity's only protection, encapsulates cosmic horror's epistemological trap. The information exists, has been documented with scientific precision, yet cannot be acted upon because acting upon it would require acknowledging cosmic reality's civilization depends on denying. Better to dismiss Dyer as insane than accept his findings' implications. The story thus becomes its own argument. You're reading an account that claims to be factual, that provides extensive evidence, that you'll almost certainly categorize as fiction because the alternative is intolerable. At the Mountains of Madness influenced decades of subsequent science fiction and horror. John Carpenter's The Thing borrows its Antarctic setting, scientific expedition structure, and revelation that alien life operates according to biological principles incompatible with terrestrial existence. The Alien franchise adopts the idea of ancient extraterrestrial civilizations whose ruins contain active dangers. The concept of created servants rebelling against creators. Shoggoth's Overthrowing Elder Things anticipates artificial intelligence concerns by decades. The novella demonstrated that cosmic horror could sustain novel-length narrative while maintaining philosophical rigor, that the genre could examine implications rather than merely gesture at them. August Derleth's relationship with Lovecraft's mythology represents both preservation and fundamental alteration. After Lovecraft's death from intestinal cancer in 1937, Derleth founded Arkham House Publishing specifically to keep Lovecraft's work in print, an act of literary rescue that prevented cosmic horror's primary texts from disappearing into pulp magazine obscurity. However, Derleth simultaneously imposed systematization that contradicted Lovecraft's core philosophy. Where Lovecraft maintained cosmic indifference as central principle, Derleth introduced moral cosmology. Elder gods representing benevolence opposing great old ones representing malevolence. He organized entities by elemental associations, Cthulhu as water-affiliated, Hastur as air-affiliated, creating taxonomic clarity Lovecraft deliberately avoided. Derleth's posthumous collaborations, stories based on Lovecraft's notes or story fragments, often reveal more about Derleth's theological concerns than Lovecraft's materialist vision. This systematization found its clearest expression in stories like The Lurker at the Threshold, 1945, credited as Lovecraft/Derleth collaboration though substantially Derleth's work. The narrative introduces explicit good versus evil conflict entirely absent from Lovecraft's cosmology. Derleth's elder gods actively oppose the Great Old Ones, intervening to prevent their return, operating as cosmic police force maintaining universal order. This framework makes the universe comprehensible. There are sides, alignments, potential for human alliance with benevolent powers. It domesticates cosmic horror by reintroducing the moral framework Lovecraft spent his career eliminating. Yet Derleth's efforts ensured Lovecraft's stories remained available through the 1940s and 1950s when they might otherwise have been forgotten, creating the commercial foundation that later scholars and writers would build upon. Robert E. Howard's contributions to the collaborative mythology operated on different principles. His The Black Stone, 1931, references the Necronomicon and introduces Unausprechlichen Kulten by Friedrich von Junt, demonstrating the cross-referencing technique that authenticated the shared universe. Howard's cosmic horror maintained its own character. More visceral and action-oriented than Lovecraft's cerebral dread, often featuring protagonists who physically confront cosmic forces rather than merely witnessing them. His story, The Shadow Kingdom, anticipated body-snatching horror, depicting serpent people who infiltrate human civilization by wearing human skins. This paranoid infiltration theme would recur across later cosmic horror, suggesting that apparent humans might be masks for inhuman intelligence. Clark Ashton Smith brought Baroque prose style and aesthetic decadence to cosmic horror. His stories set in prehistoric Hyperborea, medieval Averoigne, and future Zothique deployed ornate vocabulary and sensory excess that contrasted with Lovecraft's more restrained approach. Smith created Tsathoggua, the toad god dwelling in subterranean darkness, and developed extensive mythologies around his fictional continents. His contribution demonstrated cosmic horror's stylistic flexibility. The core philosophical premises could accommodate different prose strategies. Stories like The Empire of the Necromancers and The Beast of Averoigne combined cosmic dread with sword and sorcery adventure, proving the genre could cross-pollinate with adjacent fantasy traditions without losing its essential character. Robert Bloch, who began corresponding with Lovecraft as a teenager in 1933, contributed The Shambler from the Stars, 1935, which playfully killed a Lovecraft analog character, prompting Lovecraft to respond with The Haunter of the Dark, 1936, which killed a Bloch analog character. This friendly literary murder exchange demonstrated the collaborative mythology's playful dimension. Writers could incorporate each other as characters, reference each other's inventions, and build shared narrative continuity across separate publications. Bloch's later work, particularly Notebook Found in a Deserted House, 1951, continued developing cosmic horror after Lovecraft's death while beginning to explore psychological horror that would culminate in Psycho, 1959. His career arc shows cosmic horror's influence extending into thriller and suspense genres. Ramsey Campbell represents the first major post-Lovecraft generation, beginning in the late 1950s as explicit Lovecraft imitator before developing distinctive voice. His early stories, collected in The Inhabitant of the Lake, 1964, set cosmic horror in England's Severn Valley rather than Lovecraft's New England, demonstrating the mythology's geographic portability. Campbell's mature work intensified psychological dimensions, making cosmic horror increasingly internal, not just external entities but the fear that one's own consciousness might harbor alien elements. Stories like The Faces at Pine Dunes explore perception's unreliability, suggesting reality itself fluctuates based on observer state. His contribution showed cosmic horror could evolve beyond Lovecraft's specific formulations while maintaining philosophical continuity. The Chaosiums, Call of Cthulhu, role-playing game, first published in 1981, transformed Lovecraft's mythology from literary property into participatory system. Designer Sandy Peterson created game mechanics that operationalized cosmic horror's core concepts. Characters accumulate knowledge that simultaneously empowers and damages them, investigation proceeds toward inevitable revelation, survival represents better outcome than victory. The game's sanity mechanic, players lose sanity points when encountering cosmic truths, gamified the epistemic horror central to Lovecraft's fiction. This systematization required comprehensive cataloging of entities, spells, and forbidden texts that Lovecraft left deliberately vague. The game's massive popularity introduced millions to cosmic horror through interactive experience, creating audience familiar with mythology's deep lore while potentially reducing its ineffability to statistics and dice rolls. Contemporary literary cosmic horror demonstrates the genre's ongoing evolution. Laird Barron's The Imago Sequence, 2007. And subsequent collections update cosmic horror for 21st-century anxieties, incorporating corporate malfeasance, environmental collapse, and information technology alongside traditional tentacled entities. His prose style, hard-boiled and contemporary, contrasts sharply with Lovecraft's antiquarian diction while maintaining cosmic indifference as philosophical core. Thomas Ligotti's Songs of a Dead Dreamer, 1989, and Teatro Grotesco, 2006. Push cosmic horror toward philosophical pessimism, suggesting consciousness itself represents cosmic horror's true locus, awareness as the disease for which death is the only cure. Caitlin R. Kiernan's work, particularly The Drowning Girl, 2012, integrates feminist perspectives with cosmic horror while maintaining its destabilizing epistemology. Her narrators struggle with unreliable perception, mental illness, and reality's fundamental instability in ways that resist easy categorization as supernatural or psychological. This ambiguity extends Lovecraft's technique of refusing definitive answers while addressing the problematic elements in his work, the racism, the xenophobia, the gender dynamics, that contemporary writers must acknowledge and complicate rather than simply replicate. The tension between Lovecraft's intentional ambiguity and later clarification defines cosmic horror's evolution. Each systematization, Derleth's moral cosmology, the RPG statistical modeling, contemporary fiction's psychological sophistication, adds utility while potentially reducing mystery. The mythology becomes more accessible, easier to engage with, but risks losing the fundamental inscrutability that made it horrifying. When Cthulhu possesses defined hit points and stat blocks, when the Necronomicon spells are catalogued and reproducible, when cosmic entities operate according to published rules, they become manageable. Management represents the opposite of cosmic horror's premise. Yet this collaborative expansion also demonstrates cosmic horror's remarkable durability. The mythology survives translation across media, geographic relocation, stylistic variation, and fundamental philosophical reinterpretation. Writers continue finding new angles on cosmic insignificance, new ways to generate dread from humanity's peripheral status. The core insight, that human consciousness evolved to process a simplified, survivable version of reality rather than reality itself, remains generative across contexts. Contemporary cosmic horror writers aren't simply imitating Lovecraft but extending his project, investigating what happens when consciousness confronts its own cosmic inadequacy, when knowledge becomes actively harmful, when understanding dooms the understander. The collaborative mythology Lovecraft initiated accidentally continues developing because the anxieties it addresses, epistemic uncertainty, ontological instability, temporal insignificance, remain perpetually relevant. The Necronomicon's transformation from fictional text to object of actual search represents cosmic horror's most successful reality breach. Beginning in the 1960s, university library catalogs began showing entries for the Necronomicon, inserted by pranksters who understood that institutional authentication carries psychological weight. Students requesting the book from reference librarians participated in performance that blurred fiction and scholarship. The hoax reached commercial scale when multiple publishers released actual editions, the Simon Necronomicon, 1977, claiming translation from ancient Sumerian texts, L. Sprague de Camp's Lovecraft biography referencing the book as if documentation rather than invention, scholarly articles analyzing the Necronomicon's supposed influence on medieval occultism. These publications created recursive authentication. Readers encountering multiple independent sources referencing the same text naturally assume its existence, even when all sources derive from Lovecraft's original fiction. Miskatonic University references have appeared in actual academic papers, typically as jokes understood by those familiar with Lovecraft but potentially baffling to others. Citations crediting Department of Anthropology, Miskatonic University, Arkham, MA, operate as in-group signals, markers of shared cultural literacy. The university's fictional library, supposedly housing the Western Hemisphere's most comprehensive collection of forbidden texts, gets referenced in discussions of rare books and occult scholarship. This playful citation functions differently than simple mistake. It acknowledges fiction's contamination of reality, the way invented institutions can achieve psychological presence rivaling actual ones. Some readers encountering these references lack context to recognize them as fictional, perpetuating the hoax through innocent propagation. Urban legends regarding Relia's coordinates demonstrate how fictional geography can generate actual navigation. Lovecraft placed Relia at approximately 47 degrees 9 minutes south 126 degrees 43 minutes west in the South Pacific, coordinates that correspond to oceanic point farthest from any landmass, termed Point Nemo, by geographers. This actual designation, Point Nemo as spacecraft cemetery where decommissioned satellites are directed to crash, acquired Lovecraftian associations through coincidence. Internet communities discussing Relia's location treat the coordinates as if they might mark actual submerged city, proposing expeditions, or analyzing satellite imagery for anomalies. The boundary between engaging fictional mythology and believing literal truth becomes difficult to establish. Are participants performing Lovecraft fandom or genuinely investigating? Does the distinction matter when behavior becomes indistinguishable? The Cthulhu cult phenomenon occupies ambiguous territory between performance and sincere practice. Phil Hines' Chaos Magic incorporation of Lovecraftian entities during the 1980s treated them as egregores, thought forms given independent existence through collective belief. Chaos Magic's pragmatic approach. Use whatever symbolic system produces results, allowed practitioners to invoke Cthulhu or Nyarlathotep without committing to literal existence claims. The invocation functions regardless of the entity's ontological status, belief becomes instrumental rather than descriptive. This creates uncomfortable questions about religious practice generally. When does performed belief become actual belief? If rituals produce psychological effects, does the invoked entity's fictional origin matter? Creepypasta and the SCP Foundation represent digital age evolution of Lovecraft's collaborative mythology. The SCP Foundation Wiki, documenting fictional, special containment procedures for anomalous objects and entities, adopts Lovecraft's technique of false documentation and collaborative world-building. Entries read as clinical reports. SCP-087 is an unlit platform staircase. Stairs descend on a 38-degree angle for 13 steps before reaching a semicircular platform of approximately 3 meters in diameter. Thousands of contributors have created interconnected anomalies, maintaining tonal consistency through editorial process similar to Lovecraft Circle's mutual refinement. The Foundation's appeal lies in its systematic approach to the inexplicable, attempting bureaucratic management of cosmic horror, knowing such management must eventually fail. Slender Man emerged in 2009 as crowdsourced cosmic entity, originating from Something Awful forum Photoshop contest and evolving through collaborative storytelling. The entity's characteristics, impossible height, featureless face, ability to appear in photographs unnoticed by subjects, combine folkloric motifs with digital age anxieties about surveillance and image manipulation. Slender Man's most disturbing quality is his recent invention. Unlike ancient gods or medieval demons, this entity was deliberately created in 2009 yet rapidly achieved cultural penetration suggesting much longer existence. The 2014 Waukesha stabbing, two 12-year-old girls attacking a classmate, claiming Slender Man demanded sacrifice, demonstrated fictional entity crossing into actual motivation. This represented Lovecraftian textual contamination made literal, information pattern generating real-world violence. The blurring between fictional mythology and actual belief system intensifies in digital environments where collaborative fiction, sincere occultism, ironic performance, and genuine delusion occupy the same platforms without clear markers. A Reddit post discussing Cthulhu's summoning rituals might be elaborate roleplay, chaos magic practice, creative writing exercise, or psychotic episode, and platform architecture provides no mechanism for disambiguation. Lovecraft's mythology proved particularly suited to this environment because it was already collaborative, already operated through textual fragments, already treated belief ambiguously. The internet didn't create new relationship between fiction and reality but amplified dynamics Lovecraft's work already explored. These phenomena share common property, they demonstrate ideas achieving independent existence through collective engagement. The Necronomicon doesn't exist as physical object but exists as cultural reference point, institutional joke, and object of actual search. Miskatonic University has no campus but occupies conceptual space in academic culture. Relia has no architecture but possesses coordinates that generate actual expeditionary interest. Cthulhu was invented in 1928 but receives worship in 2024. The question cosmic horror poses, what distinguishes real from sufficiently detailed fiction? Becomes increasingly difficult to answer when fictional entities demonstrate measurable cultural effects indistinguishable from real entities' effects. If a god is what people worship, treat as real, organize behavior around, then Cthulhu qualifies regardless of ontological status. Film adaptations of Lovecraft's work face fundamental incompatibility. Cosmic horror derives power from suggesting vastness beyond representation, while cinema demands showing. Early attempts like Die, Monster, Die, 1965, and The Dunwich Horror, 1970, failed precisely because they visualized entities that work only when partially glimpsed. The moment you see the monster in full lighting, practical effects limitations become obvious, the cosmic reduces to rubber suit. Roger Corman's adaptations borrowed Lovecraft's titles while abandoning his philosophy, transforming cosmic indifference into conventional supernatural menace. These films demonstrated what doesn't work: direct adaptation that attempts literal translation of Lovecraft's prose into visual imagery inevitably disappoints because imagination exceeds any achievable special effects budget. Stuart Gordon's Reanimator, 1985, succeeded by abandoning fidelity to Lovecraft's tone while maintaining his mad science premise. The film transforms Herbert West, Reanimator, into gore-soaked horror comedy, emphasizing visceral effects and transgressive humor over cosmic dread. Jeffrey Combs' performance as Herbert West, manic, immoral, utterly convinced of his scientific correctness, captures something essential about Lovecraft's protagonist's obsessive pursuit of forbidden knowledge even while the film's tone diverges completely from source material. Reanimator works because it doesn't attempt cosmic horror in visual medium, it translates Lovecraft's concepts into genre cinema that plays to film strengths rather than fighting its limitations. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, 1994, represents rare successful cinematic cosmic horror despite containing no direct Lovecraft adaptation. The film follows insurance investigator tracking missing horror novelist Sutter Kane, whose books supposedly drive readers insane. Reality increasingly destabilizes. The investigator discovers locations from Kane's novels exist as actual places, fictional characters manifest as real people, and eventually realizes he himself is character in Kane's narrative. The film's metacritical structure, fiction contaminating reality, reader becoming character, author as cosmic entity reshaping existence, operationalizes Lovecraft's epistemological horror without requiring tentacles or ancient gods. Carpenter understood that cosmic horror's essence is ontological uncertainty rather than specific imagery. The Thing, 1982, though based on John W. Campbell's Who Goes There, functions as spiritual Lovecraft adaptation. Antarctic setting, scientific expedition structure, an alien organism operating according to biological principles incompatible with terrestrial life all echo at the Mountains of Madness. The Thing's ability to perfectly imitate other organisms introduces paranoia impossible to resolve. Any character might be replaced, consciousness might be artificial, human identity might be temporary state before assimilation. The film's ambiguous ending, McCready and Child staring at each other, either could be thing, both will likely freeze regardless, captures cosmic horror's refusal of resolution. The monster isn't defeated. At best, its spread is contained, and even that remains uncertain. Video games discovered cosmic horror's natural medium through interactive participation. Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, 2005, deployed first-person perspective and gradual revelation, forcing players to navigate Innsmouth while uncovering their characters' genealogical corruption. The game mechanics operationalized Lovecraft's concepts. Sanity meter depleting as players witness horrors, transformation becoming inevitable as narrative progresses, investigation actively harming the investigator. Amnesia, The Dark Descent, 2010, refined these mechanics, making players vulnerable rather than powerful, emphasizing avoidance over confrontation. The game's monsters become less frightening through repeated exposure, exactly Lovecraft's point about cosmic horror requiring suggestion rather than full revelation. Bloodborne, 2015. Represents cosmic horror's most sophisticated gaming adaptation by disguising its true nature initially. The game presents as gothic horror, hunters fighting beasts in Victorian City, before revealing that the beasts are humanity's transformation after exposure to Eldritch truth, that the gothic architecture conceals cosmic geometry, that the player character's investigation follows the standard Lovecraftian trajectory toward contaminating revelation. The game's insight mechanic makes cosmic entities visible as players accumulate knowledge. Lower insight means safety through ignorance. Higher insight grants perception of reality's true nature but makes players vulnerable to attacks from entities they couldn't previously perceive. This perfectly translates epistemic horror into gameplay. Knowledge empowers and destroys simultaneously. Heavy metal's engagement with Lovecraft began with Metallica's instrumental, The Call of Cthulhu, 1984. The misspelling suggesting the name's essential unpronounceability. The song's structure, gradual build toward overwhelming climax without lyrics, attempts sonic equivalent of Lovecraft's mounting dread. Numerous metal bands subsequently incorporated Lovecraftian imagery. Morbid Angel named albums after Lovecraft deities. The Darkest of the Hillside Thickets built entire discography around cosmic horror. Nile combined death metal with Lovecraftian mythology. The genre's emphasis on extreme volume, dissonant harmonics, and lyrical transgression aligned naturally with cosmic horror's assault on comfortable reality. Dark ambient and drone music found even closer correspondence with Lovecraft's aesthetic. Artists like Atrium Carceri, Lustmord, and Kammerheit create soundscapes suggesting vast spaces, ancient presences, and reality slowly unhinging. Cryo Chamber label specializes in Lovecraft-inspired dark ambient, releasing collaborative albums like Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth, where multiple artists contribute tracks building composite sonic portrait of cosmic entities. These compositions work through suggestion and atmosphere. No lyrics explain the horror, no melody provides comfort, only texture and space evoking something massive and indifferent slowly becoming aware of the listener. True Detective, Season 1, 2014. Brought cosmic horror aesthetics to prestige television. The show incorporated Yellow King references from Robert Chambers, added Lovecraftian imagery through spiral symbols and ritualistic crime scenes, and structured its investigation around detectives uncovering conspiracy that extends beyond human evil into cosmic horror territory. The series' success demonstrated mainstream audience appetite for cosmic dread when deployed through detective noir framework. However, the season's finale retreated from full cosmic horror. The antagonist is apprehended, evil is localized to specific humans rather than universal condition. This compromise illustrates cosmic horror's tension with conventional narrative. Audiences accept ontological uncertainty to a point, but commercial television requires some form of resolution. Recent films like Annihilation, 2018, The Lighthouse, 2019, and Color Out of Space, 2019. Suggest cosmic horror achieving cinematic maturity. Annihilation deploys the shimmer zone where physical laws operate differently, biology mutates unpredictably, and expedition members transform or disappear, as visualization of reality's wrongness rather than specific entity. The Lighthouse uses ambiguous narrative and unreliable perspective to make viewers uncertain whether they're watching madness, supernatural horror, or both simultaneously. Color Out of Space adapts Lovecraft directly while accepting that the titular color cannot actually be shown. Instead, the film uses oversaturated magenta and reality distortion to suggest chromatic wrongness. These adaptations succeed by embracing cinema's limitations, finding visual equivalents for cosmic horror's philosophical premises rather than attempting literal translation of Lovecraft's prose. The challenge remains. Cosmic horror works through imagination's infinity, while visual media must make concrete choices. Showing Cthulhu requires deciding what Cthulhu looks like. That decision inherently limits imagination's scope. Gaming partially solves this through interactivity. Players generate their own dread through participation rather than passive viewing. Music solves it through abstraction. Sound suggests without depicting. Film succeeds when it abandons showing cosmic entities directly and instead shows their effects, reality destabilizing, perception fragmenting, characters realizing their world operates according to principles they can't comprehend. The most effective Lovecraftian adaptations aren't faithful to his stories but to his strategy, making audiences feel their own cognitive inadequacy when confronting something genuinely other. St. Joshi's Decades of Lovecraft Scholarship. Culminating in the 1,200-page biography, I Am Providence, 2010, transformed cosmic horror's creator from pulp curiosity into legitimate academic subject. Joshi established Hippocampus Press, which publishes critical editions of Lovecraft's work with extensive annotation, scholarly essays examining his philosophical influences, and previously unpublished correspondence revealing the intellectual framework behind the fiction. This academic legitimization required confronting Lovecraft's racism directly rather than excusing it as product of his time. Joshi's scholarship acknowledges the xenophobia pervading Lovecraft's work while arguing that his cosmic philosophy transcends and potentially contradicts his personal bigotry. If all humanity is cosmically insignificant, racial hierarchies become absurd. This tension between biographical racism and philosophical anti-anthropocentrism continues generating scholarly debate. Contemporary philosophy's engagement with cosmic horror operates through weird realism and speculative realism movements. Graham Harman's object-oriented ontology draws explicitly on Lovecraft, arguing that objects possess reality independent of human perception, that things exist in withdrawal from consciousness, forever inaccessible to complete understanding. Harman reads The Call of Cthulhu as philosophical text about reality's resistance to total knowledge. Eugene Thacker's In the Dust of This Planet, 2011, uses cosmic horror to explore the world without us, reality as it exists absent human consciousness to perceive it. These philosophers treat Lovecraft not as horror writer who accidentally stumbled onto philosophical implications but as thinker who used fiction to explore ideas academic philosophy couldn't adequately address. Feminist reclamation of cosmic horror navigates complex territory. Lovecraft's personal writings reveal explicit racism and implicit misogyny. His stories rarely feature women as protagonists, and when women appear they're often vectors of degeneration or objects of horror. Contemporary writers addressing this legacy include Ruth Anna Emrys, whose Winter Tide, 2017, centers on Innsmouth survivors after the federal raid, repositioning the Deep One hybrids as persecuted minority rather than monstrous threat. Emrys retains cosmic horror's philosophical framework while inverting its xenophobic premises. The other becomes protagonist, transformation becomes liberation rather than degradation, and governmental authority represents the true horror. This reclamation demonstrates cosmic horror's premises can survive separation from Lovecraft's specific prejudices. Victor Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom, 2016, directly confronts Lovecraft's racism by rewriting The Horror at Red Hook from the perspective of a black protagonist. Lovecraft's original story represents his most explicitly racist work, depicting immigrant neighborhoods as sources of cosmic contamination. Laval's novella shows the same events through Tommy Tester's experience, revealing that the cosmic horror Lovecraft depicted as external threat actually emerges from systemic racism's dehumanizing effects. The police violence, economic exploitation, and social marginalization that Tommy experiences make cosmic nihilism feel like accurate description rather than philosophical abstraction. Lavelle preserves cosmic horror's effect while demonstrating that for marginalized people, Lovecraft's abstract cosmic indifference manifests as concrete social violence. Jordan Peele's films, particularly Get Out, 2017, and Nope, 2022, deploy cosmic horror aesthetics toward social commentary. Get Out uses body snatching, Lovecraftian consciousness transfer, to literalize white appropriation of black bodies and culture. The coagula procedure, which transplants white consciousness into black bodies, operates as both science fiction premise and metaphor for systemic racism's mechanisms. Nope features an entity that appears as UFO but functions more like incomprehensible predator, combining Lovecraftian inscrutability with commentary on spectacle and exploitation. Peele demonstrates that cosmic horror's machinery, transformation, contamination, entities beyond understanding, applies equally well to analyzing power structures as to generating existential dread. Academic conferences now regularly feature Lovecraft panels at events like the International Conference on the Fantastic in the Arts and the Popular Culture Association Conference. Lovecraft Annual, published since 2007, provides peer-reviewed venue for scholarly analysis. University courses examining cosmic horror appear in literature, philosophy, and media studies departments. This academic attention creates recursive effect. Legitimization attracts more scholars, generating more publications, which further establishes cosmic horror as worthy of serious study. The genre's elevation from pulp entertainment to academic subject parallels science fiction's earlier trajectory, suggesting cultural forms initially dismissed as lowbrow can achieve scholarly recognition when their philosophical implications become apparent. Environmental horror represents cosmic horror's application to climate anxiety. Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, 2014, depicts Area X, region where nature operates according to alien rules, transforming explorers who venture too deep. The novel refuses to explain what Area X is, where it came from, or what it wants, maintaining cosmic horror's epistemological uncertainty while addressing ecological themes. Area X might be alien intervention, Earth's immune response to human presence, or reality itself asserting non-human logic. This ambiguity allows the text to function as climate change metaphor. We've triggered processes we can't control or fully understand, whose outcomes will transform Earth's habitability. Architecture and design's engagement with Lovecraftian aesthetics explores non-Euclidean geometry's visual translation. Artist and architect Lebbeus Woods created speculative drawings of impossible spaces that evoke Relia's wrongness. Video game-level designers reference Lovecraft when creating environments that subtly violate spatial logic, corridors that seem longer than buildings containing them, rooms whose dimensions shift based on viewing angle. This design approach recognizes that architectural wrongness generates unease more effectively than monsters. When space itself feels incorrect, when geometry behaves impossibly, the environment becomes antagonist independent of entities inhabiting it. Internet culture transformed Cthulhu into meme, Cthulhu for president, why choose the lesser evil, bumper stickers, plush Cthulhu toys, IA, as ironic greeting. This mimetic spread simultaneously popularizes and potentially defangs cosmic horror. Can an entity inspire existential dread when it appears on coffee mugs? Does familiarity breed contempt, or does ubiquitous presence indicate successful cultural penetration? The meme functions ambiguously. Surface-level engagement treats Cthulhu as joke, but the joke's premise, cosmic entity whose existence renders human concerns meaningless, contains cosmic horror's philosophical core. Even ironic invocation perpetuates the framework. These various appropriations demonstrate cosmic horror's modular adaptability. Feminist writers retain epistemological uncertainty while rejecting xenophobia. Philosophers extract ontological implications while discarding narrative apparatus. Environmental activists employ cosmic indifference as climate metaphor. Black writers repurpose transformation narratives to analyze systemic racism. Each appropriation preserves different elements while modifying others, suggesting cosmic horror functions less as fixed genre and more as philosophical toolkit applicable across contexts. The core insight, that reality might be fundamentally incompatible with human flourishing, that knowledge can harm, that consciousness evolved to process simplified reality rather than actual reality, transcends any single application. The Anthropocene Epoch. Geological period defined by humanity's planet-scale environmental impact, generates cosmic horror in reverse. Where Lovecraft's fiction depicted humanity as cosmically insignificant, current reality reveals humanity as geological force capable of triggering mass extinction and climate transformation. This produces distinctive dread, we're simultaneously too insignificant to matter cosmically and significant enough to destroy our own habitat. The existential vertigo resembles cosmic horror's characteristic effect, discovering reality operates differently than assumed, that comfortable frameworks no longer apply. Climate scientists describe experiencing depression after internalizing their model's implications, a response structurally identical to Lovecraft's protagonists going mad from cosmic knowledge. You cannot unknow that current carbon trajectories make catastrophic warming inevitable, you cannot unthink what the data reveals. Information age anxiety manifests as epistemic overload similar to forbidden knowledge's toxicity. The Internet provides access to effectively infinite information, conspiracy theories, scientific papers, historical archives, real-time global events, creating conditions where correlation becomes dangerous. QAnon demonstrates this perfectly. Adherents assemble fragments from disparate sources into comprehensive narrative explaining hidden reality. The conspiracy's structure mirrors Lovecraft's investigative stories, scattered evidence assembled reveals terrible truth suppressed by authorities. That the truth is demonstrably false matters less than the psychological pattern it follows. Too much information plus pattern recognition cognition produces conviction that cannot be dislodged by contrary evidence. The Necronomicon's danger was information that damaged minds processing it. The Internet delivers similar toxicity through sheer volume and accessibility. Existential risk discourse, artificial intelligence, engineered pandemics, nuclear war, adopts cosmic horror's temporal framework. Organizations like the Future of Humanity Institute and the Center for Existential Risk analyze threats that could terminate human civilization or cause human extinction. Their work requires confronting scenarios where humanity's entire existence becomes cosmically brief episode between emergence and elimination. AGI researchers describe value alignment problem in Lovecraftian terms. We might create intelligence vastly exceeding human capacity but operating according to goals fundamentally incompatible with human survival. This recapitulates the Shoggoth narrative. Created servants developing their own agendas, creators losing control over systems designed to serve them. The researchers aren't reading horror fiction for entertainment, they're using it as analytical framework for actual technological trajectories. Post-truth epistemology makes cosmic horror's unreliable narration feel like documentary realism. When consensus reality fragments into competing interpretations, when institutional authorities lose credibility, when deep fakes make visual evidence unreliable, Lovecraft's epistemological uncertainty becomes daily experience. His story's characteristic move, narrator reporting impossible events while questioning their own perception, mirrors contemporary information environment. Did that event actually occur or was the footage manipulated? Is this news source reporting facts or generating propaganda? The inability to establish stable truth resembles cosmic horror's refusal of definitive answers. We're living in the unreliable narration, uncertain whether we're perceiving reality or participating in collective delusion. Scale horror emerges from confronting physical reality's actual parameters. Astronomical observation reveals universe containing approximately 2 trillion galaxies, each hosting billions of stars, across distances measurable only in light-years. Quantum mechanics describes reality at scales where particles exist in superposition, where observation affects observed phenomena, where determinism breaks down. Both extremes, the cosmically vast and the quantum small, exceed human cognitive architecture's processing capacity. We evolved to navigate middle-scale reality. Objects we can grasp, distances we can traverse, timescales we can experience. Lovecraft's cosmic horror translated these scale problems into narrative form, making readers feel the cognitive strain of attempting to process scales consciousness wasn't designed to handle. The new weird, literary movement associated with China Miéville, Jeff Vandermeer, and others, urbanizes cosmic horror, relocating it from remote locations to cities where the weird becomes everyday. Miéville's Perdido Street Station, 2000, depicts city where impossible creatures, reality-warping technologies, and incomprehensible entities coexist with bureaucratic governance. The weird isn't elsewhere anymore, it's integrated into urban infrastructure. Vandermeer's Born, 2017, portrays post-collapse city where biotech experimentation produced entities that might be animals, plants, intelligent beings, or categories transcending those distinctions. This urbanization reflects contemporary reality where the strange isn't distant but adjacent, CRISPR gene editing, algorithmic trading executing millions of transactions per second according to logic no individual understands, ecological systems collapsing in real time. Cosmic horror's migration to cities suggests we've built the non-Euclidean architecture ourselves. Cosmic horror as coping mechanism inverts its apparent message. If nothing matters cosmically, then local mattering becomes liberated from cosmic justification. Existentialism reached similar conclusion, absurdism as freedom rather than curse, but cosmic horror's effect differs. Where existentialism emphasizes creating meaning through choice, cosmic horror offers relief from meaning's burden. You're not responsible for cosmic significance because cosmic significance is impossible. This produces strange comfort. Your failures don't matter universally, but neither do anyone else's triumphs. The universe's indifference applies equally to everyone, creating perverse egalitarianism. Some readers find this liberating, cosmic horror as antidote to self-importance, reminder that our anxieties occupy minuscule portion of reality's operations. Why cosmic horror now? Contemporary resonance stems from multiple converging anxieties that Lovecraft's framework accommodates almost too well. Scientific literacy makes cosmic insignificance intellectually undeniable while remaining emotionally intolerable. Technological acceleration produces tools we create but cannot control. Environmental feedback loops generate consequences we triggered but cannot reverse. Information systems exceed individual comprehension while shaping behavior algorithmically. Global interconnection means local events cascade unpredictably. Each of these generates the effect cosmic horror specializes in. Discovering you're embedded in systems operating according to principles incompatible with your survival or understanding. We're not reading Lovecraft for historical interest. We're reading him because his century-old diagnosis increasingly resembles our daily experience. The genre's evolution from pulp fiction to cultural dominant metaphor suggests cosmic horror identified something persistent about consciousness's relationship to reality. Lovecraft wasn't inventing fears but articulating ones that scientific materialism makes unavoidable. If consciousness is emergent property of matter, if the universe operates mechanistically without purpose, if human values have no cosmic foundation, then cosmic horror's philosophical premises are literally true. The genre's popularity might indicate collective acknowledgement of this truth, processed through fiction because direct confrontation proves psychologically untenable. We're telling ourselves cosmic horror stories for the same reason Lovecraft's characters document forbidden knowledge, compulsion to articulate what we've already understood but cannot comfortably accept. The final question cosmic horror poses has become more urgent. Has the genre's ubiquity defined its implications, or made them more urgent? Cthulhu as cultural icon suggests familiarity breeding comfort, the tentacled god becomes mascot rather than existential threat. Yet comfort might be adaptive illusion, strategic ignorance permitting continued function despite understanding reality's fundamental hostility to human flourishing. The cosmic horror framework survives popularization because its core insight remains valid regardless of how many plush Cthulhus get manufactured. You cannot QTFA away the heat death of the universe, the inevitability of entropy, the fundamental incompatibility between evolved consciousness and actual reality. The cosmic horror is real, we're just very good at not thinking about it most of the time. Which, Lovecraft would note, represents the only sustainable approach to information that consciousness cannot survive processing. The most merciful thing in the world remains the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents, and we've built an entire genre celebrating that necessary failure.